Like Yuuki and his party, Leon, Elmesia, and the others also did not want to force themselves into fighting. Even though my injury has healed, I still feel tired, so I would like to rest if possible. What worries me is how much the two original members have been strengthened. It seemed that they would become increasingly difficult to control in the future. This means that Rimuru camp has become incredibly stronger. The balance between nations is already beginning to collapse, but there will be a mountain of headaches after the war, Elmesia said, holding her head in her hands. Still, it is fortunate in the sense that it gives us the time to think about the future. Although it seemed like it would be difficult, Hermesia's expression brightened. Kigali harbors a deep-seated grudge against Jahil. Not only resentment, but also hatred. But there is. To be honest, the difference in ability is so great that it seems like nothing I do will work. That was my true feelings. Jahil now possessed an amount of magical energy that rivaled or even surpassed that of a dragon, and possessed terrifying recovery abilities and extremely powerful destructive methods. From Kaguri's perspective, this was like reaching the realm of the gods. His rational judgment prevailed over his emotions and told him that he shouldn't force himself to get involved. Moreover, Ultima and Carrera were far too overwhelming. Are they on bad terms, or are they on good terms? Although they complained about each other as if they were at odds with each other, their cooperation was nothing short of impressive. Not bad moves. If you had been given Rimuru-sama's power and yet showed such a shameful performance in battle, I was planning to purge you with my own hands, but oh well. Diablo, who had appeared before anyone noticed, commented on how the two were fighting. It's a condescending view from afar, and it's more refreshing than shocking. Weren't you with someone else? Kigali asked timidly. Leon and the others were listening intently, but Diablo answered without paying any attention to them. HMPH, if I go out it will be over in an instant. I can't take away their chance to shine right. It was an incredible amount of confidence, but to those who knew Diablo, it was no surprise. Diablo continued. I would like to observe Rimuru-sama's exploits, but that's not possible. Since this is an order from Rimuru-sama, I have no choice but to be here, Diablo said, trying to endure the pain. As if to prove his words, Cornu, who was at the first place Diablo headed, was fighting Rudra on equal terms. Cornu was killed in a surprise attack by Velgrind, but he was a top-class warrior and a confidant of the Yakai demon Ma King, Feldway. What's more, he had now fused with the power of Habataki. He was not an opponent that could be easily defeated. He was no easy opponent, but Diablo didn't see it that way. To begin with, the person facing Cornu head-on was strong. This was only natural, as Rudra was an equal match with Guy. If Rudra had been in his original body, rather than inhabiting the body of an ordinary boy named Masayuki, he would have been able to defeat Cornu all by himself. Unfortunately, Rudra currently lacks that level of power, and it would be difficult for him to defeat Cornu alone. However, from Diablo's point of view, it wasn't a problem. This is because there were other strong people there besides Rudra. Specifically, there was Feldway, whom Diablo had brought to the battlefield. There were also some of Cornu's old friends, Zalerio and Obra. Verbal persuasion had already begun, and judging from Cornu's confused state, it seemed there was no need for Diablo to intervene. Seeing the situation, Leon, Yuuki, and the others agreed with Diablo's words. Certainly, since Rimuru had asked him to, there was no way he would abandon the front line. Not only that, but he also seemed to be keeping a watchful eye over the whole situation, to avoid taking sides and causing the others to be defeated. It's hard to judge whether he has a sense of responsibility or not. Elmesia, who was listening next to him, was also troubled. Regardless, Diablo saw that this place was safe for the time being. Ultima and Carrera won't be defeated so easily. However, please don't let your guard down. You never know what will happen on the battlefield. Diablo said this and left the place. When Diablo arrived, Testarossa and Hinata were struggling against Vega. As expected, Testarossa had already taken possession of the slime cells with just one word. Therefore, she didn't seem to be struggling against Vega and instead went around to support Hinata. This time, they were carrying out a meticulous containment operation to ensure that they would not escape. I see, as expected of Testarossa. Oh, I'm glad you praised me. It's an emotionless exchange, but he's still genuinely praising her and expressing his happiness. Meanwhile, what about Vega? To be honest, I was confused. Damn it, why am I fighting? Why are you targeting me? Vega no longer had any desire to fight. Although he sought strength, it was powerless in the face of loneliness. Therefore, Vega reflected on his actions in his own way. I had an infinite amount of time to reflect on my foolishness. And Vega had arrived at one truth. What's important is to have compassion for others. As proof of this, his former comrades were safe. I could see Yuuki in the distance, and I could also confirm that Mai was there too. He was safe. In the end, I was wrong. I thought the boss was a fool for dying while protecting his comrades, but now I'm envious of him. It was an envy towards Yuuki that he had never felt before. Although Vega wanted to savor those feelings, there were people who got in his way. Well, I guess I have some connection with these women. They were the ones who had fought Vega in the past. To make matters worse, one of the women, Testarossa, looked extremely dangerous even to Vega. In addition to these two, Shin and Kumara, who seemed full of motivation, joined in the attack. This was causing Vega an indescribable amount of pain. Vega's instincts told him that things would be bad if he continued like this. Vega's impatience led him to act reflexively. Kai, help me. Vega shouted and began evil dragon beast production, using the corpses of the cryptid lying on the ground as bait. With the current Vega, as long as he had enough food, he could create 12 evil dragon beasts at the same time. And there was plenty of food. Moreover, the value of their existence easily exceeded 10 million. It was precisely because Vega currently possessed an incredible amount of magic essence and energy that this was reflected in the evil dragon beast that was created. Although his weaknesses of lacking skill and level remain the same, even his raw strength alone made him a monster with incredible fighting ability. All of these evil dragon beasts were unleashed at once. All 12 evil dragon beasts appeared at the same time and began to go on a rampage, following Vega's confused will. Vega's plan was to escape while the evil dragon beast was rampaging. I have no idea what the current situation is, and I don't see any reason for me to fight. Most of the evil deeds he once committed have long since been forgotten. In fact, I think I've finished my atonement, sin, and guilt. However, that was only Vega's situation. To Hinata and Testarossa, Vega was a hated enemy. Vega's inability to think about this was his limit. When Vega unleashed the evil dragon beast, Velgrind asked Rudra, who was facing off against Cornu. Those troublesome guys have started causing trouble, but shouldn't we call in the heroes again? Rudra Masyuki's heroic soul guidance Hasha no Yorub would be able to take on several evil dragon beasts. It would depend on the separate body. Soul body strength that Velgrind could prepare, but they should be able to turn the tide of battle in their favor. That was what Velgrind thought, but Rudra rejected it. That's impossible. Once a hero is summoned, they've used up all their power. Besides, Haino Yorub is originally a technique that simply unleashes each hero's special move at the same time so as not to burden them. It's difficult even for me to maintain it for an extended period of time. In this case, it wasn't for Rudra, but for Masayuki. The previous, soul-deep pain sore was tough, but even then it was still luck. Rudra explained that if he was not careful, his lifespan would be shortened. Hearing this, Velgrand quickly changed her mind. In that case, let's get the others to do their best. Velgrand seemed to prioritize Masayuki and was unwavering. Thus, the battlefield became even more chaotic. It was Gabuta and the others' job to deal with the evil dragon beasts that Vega had sent out in a panic. Of course, Gabuta and his friends were not the only ones. It would be impossible for Gabuta and Ranga, Gabil and Gerudo, plus one other beast, to face 12 evil dragon beasts. Therefore, Shin and Kumara left Vega behind and headed towards the evil dragon beasts. Not only that, Karian, Midray, and Frey, who had been watching the battle between Cornu and Rudra, also came as reinforcements. Having heard the conversation between Velgrand and Rudra, they decided that they should take action themselves. That makes 8 people plus 1 animal. Leon, Elmesia, and Sylvia, who had realized what was going on, also joined the battle. Even so, there was still one person missing, but Saoi appeared from the shadows and said, "I'll take care of him." This caused Hinata, who had started to move, to turn towards Vega. Vega's plan was wrong. In the end, Testarossa and Hinata were standing in his way, giving him no chance to escape. However, at this point, the situation changes dramatically. The world has come to a halt. As time stopped, the entire battlefield came to a standstill. And so, the outcome of the battle was left in the hands of those who even controlled time. That moment had arrived for Jahil, Cornu, and Vega. All 3 of them, simultaneously, realized that time had stopped. It was their first experience, but they were able to cope normally. This was thanks to the adaptability of the Evil-Age children. By obtaining these bodies, those who inhabited them were also able to adapt to the suspended world. This allowed some people to escape the crisis. It's Vega. Vega and the 12 evil dragon beasts were able to fight on equal terms with the gathered warriors, although their fighting style relied on physical ability and skill. Performance, they also had the troublesome ability to quickly recover if there was a corpse, so they did not back down even when facing those who were superior in strength. Half of the 12 people and 1 beast were pushing back the evil dragon beast without any difficulty, ignoring the difference in their existence values. However, the remaining half were forced to fight a battle that lacked a decisive blow, and they were gradually becoming exhausted. This situation changed completely when time stopped. The only ones around Vega who were able to move around in the suspended world were Testarossa, Shin, and Diablo. Saoi had learned how to deal with this from Diablo, but he still hadn't mastered it. Though he was conscious, he couldn't move his body. The others were all barred from all activity and were left behind on the battlefield. It was a fatal situation, but the reason this was not a decisive battle was because the enemy, evil dragon beasts, were also unable to move in the suspended world. Vega could probably move if he possessed it, but Vega was not skilled enough to think about such things. Vega himself was struggling to understand what was happening, so there was no way he could think that far. Vega had thought that now was not the time to fight, so this situation was a godsend. Fortunately or unfortunately, it was Hinata who was directly engaged in a sword fight with Vega, while Testarossa was a little distance away, deploying nothingness. He was preparing to block Vega's escape route and eliminate him in one go. Vega instinctively sensed the danger, but he was busy fending off Hinata's fierce attack. When this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity presented itself, Vega jumped at it without hesitation. The void that filled his surroundings bared its fangs, as if eating away at Vega's body. However, it was not dense enough to completely wipe out Vega. It hurts, but it's no big deal. It's a big deal. After all, the current Testarossa was even more vicious than when she was fighting Velzard. As a result of having the slime cells as her own, she was now able to manipulate nothingness with speed and precision that was incomparable to what she had been able to do before. The pure white world nihilistic world that Testarossa had constructed attacked Vega, ignoring the suspended world. Vega broke through without paying any attention to that, leaving him completely injured. Still, Vega's thinking that there's no problem as long as he's alive can be said to be abnormal in this case. Gee, he's escaped again. In this case, it doesn't seem to be your fault. Oh, it's rare for Diablo to comfort me. I was simply stating the facts. That person survived even after fighting me and Benimaru Dono, even considering that it would be difficult to eliminate him. And then, Diablo continued. It felt a little strange. You feel strange? Yes, when we faced each other in the labyrinth, he was filled with a thirst for power, but I couldn't sense any of that spirit coming from him now. A greedy desire to win. Vega didn't have that at the moment. Diablo saw through this and became suspicious. You think it's no fun to defeat an opponent who has no intention of winning. Your perspective is as misplaced as ever. Testarossa concluded, sounding exasperated. Shen nodded in agreement. I agree that Diablo is strange. Besides, there's no need to think too hard about it. If he's an enemy, defeat him. Whether he's an enemy or not can be decided after defeating him. He boldly stated many incorrect opinions. And then she said, they say you should get used to it rather than worry about it. So I think I'll go now, and left chasing Vega. Diablo and Testarossa, who were left behind, looked at each other in amazement. There were many things that concerned me, but I have to admit that Shindono has a point. The two nodded vigorously to each other and quickly followed Shin. Standing before Cornu were three old friends. Rudra put away his sword and stood by and watched. Time has stopped, but I can barely move right now. Yeah, Masayuki can't do that. Masayuki can't do anything in this suspended world. Or rather, Rudra adapting to it is abnormal. It was a technique that Veldanava had taught him directly, but it was actually quite strange that he had mastered it. Despite this, Rudra is actually worried about Masayuki. Masayuki's body is nothing more than an ordinary boy, and just housing Rudra is enough for him. With that in mind, he fought Cornu without overdoing it, and it was clear just how superior Rudra's skills were. With Feldway's help halfway through, the strain on his body had lessened. This had led to the current situation, so Rudra would be happy if the battle ended like this. Well, I hope it goes well, but just in case, I need to recover some of my strength. Rudra thought this as he watched the situation unfold. Feldway was standing in front of Cornu. His sword skill, level, and existence value all surpass Cornu's current abilities. If he hadn't accumulated fatigue to the point of exceeding his limits, he would be a powerful warrior who could defeat Cornu all by himself. Feldway, however, lowered his sword and tried to persuade Cornu. Obra and Zalario are also joining in. As expected of the former 7 angels of the origin, none of them were affected by the suspended world. This was only natural, as they had been working as Veldanava's hands and feet since a time when there was no concept of time. Feldway and the others' conversation began with them trying to calm down an excited Cornu. Feldway claims that Cornu is not responsible, as he was simply continuing to invade other worlds on his orders. That's right, Feldway is entirely to blame, insist Obra and Zalario. No, what happened after I died? Cornu asked, confused. It was no longer time to fight. Even the fact that Velgrind had burned everything to ashes was not even on the agenda. Time had stopped, yet the conversation continued as usual, which was quite confusing. Cornu finds these stories hard to accept. Feldway's true purpose in trying to rule all dimensions and the entire world was to revive the god Veldanava. And through complete control, he hoped to eradicate all misfortune. It was an extreme idea to eliminate those who did not submit, but if it was in line with the idea that might is right, then it was also an ideal form. And Cornu was one of those who believed that this was true. Unlike Obra and Zalario, he was the one whose ideology was closest to Feldway's. Complete domination of all dimensions, and the entire world is still a long way off. This is because so many derivative worlds have been born from the base world, created by Veldanava, that observation cannot keep up. The underlying idea was to be able to respond to any god who might return to any of these other worlds, but Veldanava, the god, had already returned. If that were to happen, the story would be different, and it seems that they are even planning to go beyond Feldway's expectations and create a new world. It was no wonder that Cornu was confused. In fact, Obra and Zerario were also confused. If our master is heading down the wrong path, isn't it our duty as his subordinates to point that out and correct him? God never makes mistakes. You're the same, aren't you? You're always right and have never wavered. That's because, as a leader, I didn't want to make my subordinates feel uneasy. Feldway began to say, then swallowed. Being a leader is a lonely thing. No one will follow someone who is always wavering and indecisive. The more he listened to his subordinates, the less he knew what the right path was. This was why Feldway insisted on his own idea of justice and forced it on his subordinates. Cornu thought that was the right answer. Sadly, in this situation, Feldway's followers were the most troublesome. What about that? Tell me, Feldway, I believe in you. So that's... For Feldway, who had blind faith in Veldanava, Cornu's argument was painful to hear. If we accept everything on the premise that God is never wrong, there will be no confusion whatsoever. However, in a sense, this was an abdication of responsibility. Individual opinions are meaningless, and there is no meaning to life. Diversity will disappear, and the world will become a lonely place where only God's opinion is reflected. That's right. Thinking about it, I was wrong from the start. Hasn't Veldanava Sama always wished for a world filled with diversity? Veldanava had separated from Ivalage, saying that he did not want to be alone. Even if he was omnipotent and omniscient, there was no way that such a master would ignore their opinions. Feldway had realized this only now. Shouldn't we share our opinions and make better choices? That's stupid. What if I get it wrong? The best outcome will come from the smartest person, that is, you figuring out the correct answer. Feldway said, holding his head. However, I had no reason to deny Cornu's statement. In fact, it was so similar to my own thoughts that I found myself nodding, along without even thinking. However, Feldway noticed, having been given the blood of God and Cebu by Rimuru and having returned from the brink of death, he had arrived at one truth. There he was. This is where he was. My God had not abandoned me. On the contrary, rather, Lord Veldanava trusted me as a program for the birth of a true God. This was Feldway's epiphany. It could also be called a selfish delusion. However, Feldway was filled with deep reverence for Veldanava and his benefactor, Rimuru, who had become the new god. Perhaps because of this, he was unable to abandon Cornu and had begun to listen to the opinions of others. More than ever before, trying to persuade him if possible. That's why it's a quagmire. Obra and Zerario had already looked shocked. No, Feldway was way wrong too. You've committed a grave sin. To begin with, isn't it necessary for you to have the capacity to listen to the opinions of your subordinates? That's important, isn't it? It is because you have no firm beliefs within yourself that you are confused by the words of others. But that also means there's the risk of being swayed by false beliefs. That's the Feldway from earlier. Isn't this going around in circles? Even if you search for the truth in a story that has no correct answer, you're not going to find an answer. And so the discussion continued like this, with no end in sight. Rudra was already resting. Velgrind had already become someone else's concern and was protecting Rudra, who was working hard to recover his strength. Diablo, who happened to be passing by, caught a glimpse of what was happening. But he didn't say anything. He left a scornful look behind him and walked right past the scene. Jahil also realized that time had stopped. It was his first experience, but by being able to sense the information particles, he was able to naturally accept the situation. There were still people standing in Jahil's way. It was Ultima and Karara. Just like before time stopped, the fierce attack continued. And one more, does it feel like time has stopped? The one who muttered this was Yuuki. By observing the flow of time in another world, Yuuki had also developed an immunity to the stopped world. However, that was only because Yuuki was a genius. Mai, who was supposed to be experiencing it with him, was left behind as usual. Even Laplace couldn't even recognize that time had stopped. The same was true for Leon, but even for a former hero, the impossible was impossible. As a result, our fighting power against Jahil had decreased, but that was not a problem. After all, even before time stopped, Ultima and Karara were the only ones fighting. Jahil, and now even Luminous, has joined the battle. That fool over there has his own reasons, so I will help him. With a look of complete naturalness on his face, he stood alongside Ultima and Karara. You damn women. Jahil's curses, mixed with resentment, became thoughts and echoed throughout the suspended world. Hearing this, Ultima's expression was filled with joy. I like that frustrated look on your face. I'll torture you even more. You're as mean as ever. I'm a kind person, so I'd say we should just get rid of you. Easily. What are you talking about? You've been using me as a test subject for new techniques for a while now. Isn't that inevitable? This guy is just too stubborn. Ultima nodded in response to Karara's opinion, saying, I guess so. In fact, Jahil was incredibly tenacious. Simply put, their existence value has become enormous, and even if they launch a poor attack, they will recover instantly. You guys are the same as always, but I feel you can rely on me at times like this. You too, Ruminas. We may not be able to cooperate in the future, you know. If you think about it like that, it's a valuable opportunity. In terms of ability, Ultima and Karara were superior. The same can be said for Ruminas. She has even obtained the Genesis class Law Dharma, making her excellent in terms of combat ability. However, the reason the matter hadn't been resolved was not because they were just playing around. Both Ultima and Karara had devised an attack method that encompassed nothingness. They had finally succeeded in opening the door deep within their hearts that they had felt for some time, but had been unable to open. And just because they had obtained slime cells and become stronger, the two of them were not the type to prioritize their own interests and tastes. Though they got a little carried away, they set about taking down Jahil with precision. Ruminas then resurrected her memories of being a divine ancestor and attempted to reintegrate her personality. This gave her unprecedented power, even to the point where she was on par with the power of the dragon kind. However, they were unable to defeat him because Jahil also possessed enormous magical power. If Jahil had not fused with Swim, they would have annihilated his soul long ago. Their words were harsh because of the regret they felt for not being able to do so. On the other hand, Jahil is also full of complaints. Thanks to Yuuki's power, he should have died, consumed by his own desires, but he was resurrected by God's mercy. As soon as he understood this fact, he regained his distorted confidence, knowing that he had not been wrong after all. Yet he finds himself at the mercy of 3 cheeky women. That is something Jahil cannot forgive. My physical strength is gradually being depleted. The losses were exceeding the recovery rate, and defeat was inevitable. GRRR, this is bad, this is bad. I still have some strength left, but at this rate, I'll lose. Although he doesn't feel any pain, fear is engraved into his body. Spiritual life forms, especially information life forms, digital nature, lose the moment they think they have lost. Jahil was getting impatient and continued to fight back without being able to come up with any good ideas. Now that time had stopped, he was no longer able to use any emission type techniques, which put Jahil at a disadvantage. Until now, Yuuki had been getting in the way, and they hadn't been able to get any effective results, and now they were completely at a loss. Jahil felt annoyed, but that alone would not improve the situation. Even Swim's secret technique, which he had finally understood, quantum splash, the diffusion distortion quantum cannon, was impossible to use in the suspended world, where all the laws of physics did not apply. Damn it, I, the Sorcerer Emperor, cannot be allowed to rot in a place like this. Jahil let out a roar of rage-like thoughts. It'll burn you down. And then, using that anger as fuel, he activates his own powers. Even the hellish flames of ultimate enchantment, Flame King Agni, cannot be released inside a suspended world. However, if it is inside one's own body, it is a different story. That guy. I can observe the regularity of quantum fluctuations on the surface of that thing's body. It seems like he's aiming for something. I don't care. I'll face them head on and defeat any scheme they may have. This was the reaction of Ultima, Ruminez, and Karara. The 3 girls then tried to move in different directions, but Jahil's attacks, which seemed to have been self-absorbed, exceeded their expectations. The difference in their strength was too great. Compared to Ultima and Karara, her presence value is more than 20 times greater. Even compared to Ruminez, who possesses the Genesis class she possessed more than double the power. Without thinking about the consequences, Jahil launched a suicide attack, using all his power internally. It was impossible to stop him using normal methods. Hey Karara, weren't you supposed to stop him right in front of me? Don't ask for too much. I think that's a bit too much. Well, that's impossible. At first glance, that sort of move seems reckless, but it actually makes sense. Ruminez commented, glaring at Ultima and Karara as they began arguing. Jahil's attacks are simple. There was no skill involved. It was just a brute force that combined authority and natural strength. But however, without Jahil even realizing it, it was functioning as a technology art. The internal combustion, caused by the hellish flames of ultimate enchantment. Flame King Agni consumed Jahil's magic essence and energy as he burned inside his body. This reacted with the power reactor in Swim's body, causing an abnormal increase in energy. Furthermore, the scales that covered Swim's body had now become armor made of the ultimate metal, Hurricane, and were protecting Jahil. As a result of these effects combining, Jahil himself turned into a giant flame ball. Just touching it would cause great damage, so careless handling was dangerous. Enough to be fatal, Jahil flies around leaping. There was no trace of Swim's appearance left, and his body resembled Footman's, bouncing like a ball. And wherever the enormous flame ball touched, even the earth itself crumbled into dust and burned up. Laugh out loud, laugh out loud, laugh out loud. Experience my terror to the fullest. Jahil laughed loudly and cornered Ultima and the others. Yuki, who had been watching the match as if it were someone else's problem, also felt that the situation was bad. This is because there is no telling when or where Jahil's attack will be directed. Behind Yuki were Kagari and the others who had been left behind in the suspended world. If they charged here, it would be difficult to defend against them. This is bad. I could easily escape by myself, but it's difficult to protect everyone. Or rather, it's impossible, right? Yuki thought about it, but no good ideas came to mind. No matter how I thought about it, all I could do was pray that they wouldn't come over here. But when I think about this, bad imaginations often turn out to be correct. That jinx turned out to be correct once again. As Yuki watched, Karara nimbly dodged Jahil as if he were fighting a bull. Hey, you dodged it again. Isn't that obvious? Unless you're a complete idiot, no one would accept something like this and carry it out. Ultima tried to provoke Karara, but she simply brushed him off. While this conversation was unfolding, Yuki had no time for it. Oh no. No matter how you look at it, the Jahil that Karara dodged was on a direct course towards Yuki. Yuki himself has no problem dodging the attack, but if he does so, his comrades will die. You're kidding, right? Does that mean I've become a complete idiot? There's no other way, Yuki decides. I wanted to aim higher, but it seems I have no choice but to give up. However, I have no intention of dying for nothing. Jahil's attacks cannot be negated by ability seal anti-skill alone, but by skillfully using Death Palm Steel Life. In combination, he plans to minimize the damage. If all went well, they would survive. Yuki believed this and took a gamble. Oh well, whatever. It's all down to fate. Those are the words I definitely didn't want to say, Yuki thought as he braced himself. The absolute difference in magical power between him and Jahil cannot be negated by poor technique, now that his superior authority has also disappeared. The outcome that awaits him will surely be a tragic one. Still, if you're lucky. This is the worst. I guess I'll just have to rely on luck in the end. Yuki laughed at himself, but was still trying to stay positive and do his best when a wall appeared before him, catching his eye. Heth, that's not like a boss, you're being very timid. Hearing the nasty remark, I realized it was his back. Is that Vega? Yes. Immediately afterwards, you get the illusion that a strong vibration has occurred. This was the result of the collision between Jahil and Vega, but if time had passed, the surrounding area would have been reduced to ash iron dust. Vega, Yuki called out. Vega lived life as if it were a matter of course. Even when comparing existence values, he is superior to Jahil. There is no way he can die so easily. And what's more, although he was not unscathed, Vega's turn was not over yet. To counter Jahil's extremely large flame ball, Vega activated Infinite Eater. Infinite Eater had also absorbed Xeranis's Dark Multiplication Eater, Devastator virus, exerting the terrifying effect of corroding its target and transforming it into the user's own body. It's an extremely brutal technique that makes Yuki's Death Palm and Steel Life look nothing like it. Jahil is like a superheated, super-powerful cannonball, but Vega is a monster that can even absorb it. A direct hit from Jahil's super-large flame ball causes great damage, but it is repaired by infinite regeneration, and the lost energy is replenished by consuming Jahil. Far from being a crisis, it was clearly a victory for Vega. Crackling, zzz. Jahil had turned into a fireball, but now that he was captured by Vega, it seemed he had no way to escape. Damn it, let go. Don't let go, you bastard. Jahil desperately tries to increase his heat and burn Vega to ashes. However, Vega continued to eat Jahil without regard for his burns. It's a very gruesome sight. A normal person would avoid looking directly at it, but Yuuki is not the type to worry about that. HMPH, as expected, I wasted my time worrying, he said nastily to Vega. Vega responded with a fearless laugh. Well, if it wasn't for me, you would have died. This one, too, completely ignored Jahil's complaints and acted in a bold yet happy manner. Vega was satisfied. Even Vega himself couldn't understand why he had protected Yuuki. The usual Vega would have abandoned him. However, having endured such an overwhelming period of loneliness, Vega had undergone a slight change. Vega thought, feeling strangely satisfied. Even I can do it if I try. I only thought about myself and thought of other people as nothing more than stepping stones. I had lived my life deceiving myself into believing that I didn't need friends. But now, he was naturally acting for his friends, without even considering the profits or losses. No, at that moment, he didn't have the time to worry about what Yuuki and the others thought of him. But I didn't want anyone to die. That was Vega's true feelings, and the reason his body moved on its own. However, in stark contrast to Vega's satisfaction was Jahil, who was on the verge of being devoured. Don't mess with me, don't mess with me. And so, his resentment grew deeper and deeper. And then we come to one conclusion. The result was a thought reached Yuuki and Vega, who were laughing together from the sky. Hey, this is no time to let your guard down. It's Karara. Ignoring Ultima, who looked at him with a confused look on her face, he issued a warning to Yuuki and the others. No matter how you look at it, the battle is over. So what's going on? Ultima wondered, but then she sensed the faint presence of something like magic being activated. Even though time had stopped, the only thing they could activate was primitive magic, a magic that even they themselves could not use. There was no way that someone like Jahil could use it, but the signs were too clear to ignore. That being said, it was a level that only Karara and Ultima, who were skilled in magic, could notice, so it was an exquisite stroke of luck. This was because it was an evil art that used death as a medium, and was the concentrated grudge of Jahil, and was a type of magic that was distinct from magic. It has magical effects, but it is not magic. It is different from the mystical secret, reincarnation, and the great secret, possession, which are systematized techniques that anyone can use. The unique evil magic that only Jahil could use was the forbidden evil magic, body snatch. In this case, the two original people should have been praised. Because it had a magical effect, Karara and Ultima were able to sense its presence. It would have been impossible for Yuuki to notice it in a suspended world where all vibrations and wavelengths had stopped, no matter how much of a genius he was. Vega, on the other hand, hadn't even noticed what had happened. He didn't even realize he was under attack, and didn't even understand what Karara was on guard for. What's going on? Jahil is still alive. Vega, kill him now. Oh, okay. Vega also began to panic, after being ordered by Yuuki. However, by then it was already too late. Originally, body snatch was a technique that required the user's own death. Even if one tried to kill Jahil, his death was already certain. Maria shouted in a panic after completing her analysis. It's impossible, it's impossible. His goal is. It was Vega's own body. Jahil is trying to destroy Vega's heart and take over his mind. Vega tried to counter this, but he had no way of doing so. Ultimate ability, ultimate skill, evil dragon king Azidahaka is an invincible power, but in reality there were few countermeasures against mental attacks. This was because it repelled all attacks before they reached his inner self, so there was no need to be so wary. To begin with, mental attacks don't work on those who possess ultimate skills. This is normal, and it's impossible to affect their innermost minds. To make this possible, a number of conditions had to be met, and steps had to be followed carefully. Jahil's actions were a desperate attempt. However, fate smiled upon Jahil. First, there is the condition of reaching the inner workings of the body, which was achieved by being eaten. Next, Vega's mentality. Though physically strong, Vega's mind was immature and still very childish. On top of that, he had been completely worn out by his time in the end world. His heart core had revived just as it was about to disappear, so his insides were in tatters. His mental defenses had been completely destroyed. It was the perfect timing for Jahil to strike. A result, Jahil won the bet. Vega had a shocked expression on his face and turned his gaze towards Yuki, pleading for help. "Boss, help me. Something's wrong. There's something horrible inside me." Vega begins to suffer, and his body begins to pulsate violently. It was a similar phenomenon to when he ate Jahil, but this time it was clear that it wasn't Vega's will. This is bad. That's an incredible amount of energy. Yes, I want to get rid of them now, but I think this is a bit beyond our control. Karara and Ultima were getting anxious. Even Rumina seemed speechless. That was no surprise, as a new monster was about to be born. A monster that combined the existence values of Vega and Jahil, Kakashi and Swim, and could control all of their powers. What a wonderful, wonderful power. Laughing evilly was the victorious Jahil. "Help me, Bazu, help me." Vega's head was growing on the palm of Jahil's right hand. He had deliberately left it there. "You bastards, I'll give you punishment for underestimating me. I'll make an example of you, you bastards." Jahil grabbed Vega's head. "Gug, stop it." Vega was in agony. The terrifying pressure was so great that it felt like his skull was about to split open, or rather, by releasing the pressure the moment it actually split open. Vega's head seemed to be repeatedly splitting and regenerating. It seemed that all of Vega's powers had been taken away, and even his sense of pain had been restored. Vega was crying out in horrible pain, but there was nothing that could be done about it. In contrast to Vega, Jahil's body shape is gradually becoming slimmer. It is not based on Footman, nor is it modeled after Swim when he was a young girl. It is the original Jahil, the first-rank disciple of the divine ancestor Twilight, Valentine in his younger days, and he has derived the optimal solution for his own body. Its entire body was covered in an exoskeleton made of the ultimate metal, Hihiricane, which had a black base and shone with rainbow colors. Because Vega had also eaten Xeranis, information about his terrifying body had been recreated. "Phew, wonderful. I feel my power surge forth like never before," Jahil said with satisfaction. In his hands, Vega was groaning in pain. This contrast spoke to the reality of winners and losers. Seeing this, Yuki made up his mind. "Oh dear, I didn't really like you that much, but you were still my friend." Vega had many thoughts. Still, Yuki is not so heartless as to let Jahil do as he pleases. "I know we didn't have a heartfelt relationship of trust, but I'll at least make things easier for you," Yuki shouted and charged towards Jahil. Maria was the one to complain about this. "You're an idiot, aren't you? You are an idiot." Charging into an opponent that there is no way to win is not a strategy or anything like that. It is simply self-indulgence. Even a fool could say that he had misread the situation, but no words would reach someone who knew they were wrong from the start. However, Maria somehow finds Yuki, who lives for his friends, dazzling. "Okay, that's fine. Then I'll keep you alive." Whatever action Yuuki takes, it is Maria's role to support him with all her might. If she didn't do that, Yuuki would die. Maria thought that wouldn't be any fun. I believe in your tenacious nature. Shut up, you're so noisy. In this way, the two become each other's best partners, making it hard to believe that they don't get along. Shin was impressed by this. He had followed Vega, but had been watching the situation since Vega had rescued Yuuki and the others. I like that spirit. I thought he was just a trashy, worthless guy, but it seems there's something interesting about him. He blurted out his true feelings without sugarcoating them. Yuuki, who had been making a suicide mission against Jahil, was a little dejected when he heard this, but Shin's support was just what he wanted. Even though it's almost like committing suicide, I'm very happy that he's willing to go along with it. Ugh, you small fry. Jahil showed his displeasure and shot out a tentacle at Shin. Shin deflected them by swinging her great sword. It may look rough, but it was an incredible technique. It's quite something, really, Yuuki said with a wry smile. Then, not wanting to miss the opportunity that Shin had risked her life to create for him, he activated teleportation, aiming towards Jahil's pocket. Even in this suspended world, he could use teleportation as long as it was within the visible range. As soon as Yuuki appeared, he activated his secret technique at maximum power. Crazy for death-lost entropy. How clever. I don't care about such childish things anymore, HMPH. Yuuki thrust out his palm and it hit Vega's head, which was growing in Jahil's outstretched right hand. Having been killed by that technique before, Jahil flinched, if only for a moment. However, he felt no tormenting pain, nor any sense of loss, and he didn't even feel as if any effect had been negated. Jahil praised himself, saying that it was thanks to his own strength, but in fact, the attack wasn't directed at him. Jahil was right to feel that way. The target was not Jahil, it was Vega. At the same time as revering Vega's desire to live, it also erased his fear and pain. It was a compassionate technique. Thank you. I'm neither in pain nor scared anymore. Vega's expression became relaxed, and that wasn't the end of it. Cut Dan head 2 Demon Kai Blade Jin. Taking advantage of Jahil's frightened moment, Shin approached and struck with a slash of her great sword. Since Shin can make even the impossible possible, it would not be surprising if she were able to slice off Jahil's wrist. Moreover, since Jahil was currently in a state where he was frightened by the traumatic attack, ultimate ability, ultimate skill, tyrannical King Susanoo, would be effective against him. As a result, Vega's wrist with a head on it was sent flying through the air. And then, someone else took action. You hopeless bastard, I'll help you out a little. Just as Shin's heart was moved, Ruminez was also impressed with Yuuki. In order to reciprocate his feelings, she decided to join the battle at the perfect time. However, Ruminez's target was not Jahil, but Vega. Vega was still alive, despite Yuuki's attacks alone. However, the head was under the influence of Jahil, and even the control of the Devastator virus, Dark Multiplication Devourer, that Vega possessed had been taken away. Not only would he not be able to die if things continued like this, Vega's soul would not be released either. As soon as the influence of Yuuki's authority faded, he would be tormented by even greater fear and pain. Ruminez saw through it. The fusion between Jahil and Vega was so great that even Ultima and Carrera could not separate them. Therefore, there was only one way to save them. Ruminez caught Vega's head and looked at him with a look of affection. It's the least I can do you. I will grant you a painless death blessing. It was a miracle that could be activated even in a suspended world, that directly affected the target's soul. The laws were different, so it couldn't affect anything outside the body, but it didn't matter if it came into contact with something. Although inseparable evil forces got in the way, Ruminas buried them all together. For the first time in his life, Vega felt grateful. I feel like I have found a peace that I have longed for, but never been able to find. Until now. And even more than that. I truly believed that I was not alone. I'm so happy. To think that someone would take action for someone like me, I'm so satisfied. With those words, Vega died. Vega's soul was saved. Vega had hoped for a peaceful death, rather than enduring the painful and eternal solitude that would prevent him from dying. At that moment, his wish was beautifully fulfilled. Taking advantage of Jahil's frightened moment, Yuuki put Vega at ease and used teleportation to escape. This is the result of excellent teamwork. As expected, Maria. Shut up. I know what you're thinking, I know what you're thinking. As they exchanged such hateful remarks, Yuuki distanced himself from Jahil. Yuuki surpasses Jahil in terms of running speed alone. All of this was possible thanks to Maria's cooperation. However, simply running away is not enough. To those who were left behind, Yuuki's actions were extremely irresponsible. They were also causing the most trouble, and he became the target of an angry Jahil.